Welcome inside the voice of college football, Arkansas. I am your host today, Austin Robbie. We've got a jam-packed show today. So it's not just going to be a recap and a preview. We've got a couple other things to throw in. That's going to start off with the SEC announces the annual opponents. So today we found out like this. We knew already that the structure for these upcoming seasons are going to be 9 games schedules for conference games. So we found out today, and I think tomorrow's the official release for like on TV and like nationwide. But today they announced the SEC's like annual game. So the structure really is 6 games. You're going to rotate every single year. It's going to be 6 new teams, and there's 15 teams besides your team in the SEC. So it'll be 6 new teams and 3 annual opponents, and then the next season it'll be 6 new teams, 3 annual opponents. So essentially, over a 2-year period, you'll have played the entire SEC. So today we found out who Arkansas, as well as the rest of the SEC's annual opponents are going to be. And I was kind of looking at it, thinking like, who would Arkansas's opponents be? And honestly, I should have talked about it last week, just to kind of give you my opinion of it. Um, but it's honestly, and I think most fans would agree, the 3 teams I expected. So LSU, Missouri, and Texas. Missouri's obviously been our new rivalry game. LSU was our old rivalry game, and then obviously Arkansas Texas has been a rivalry game in the past. And now that Texas is back in the SEC, it really made sense. Like these were 3 games that if I had to pick, these would have been in them. So essentially, the other 12 teams are who we're going to rotate to between those 2 years. We'll play one of them at home 1 year, and then probably 2 years later, we'll play them at their place. But those are the 3 games for the SEC's annual opponents for Arkansas. So I truly thought those would be what they are. So I don't think most SEC or Arkansas fans are going to be too surprised. But I did want to start with that because that was some news that, I just kind of break up the show a little bit. We've talked only like the previous game and then the game that's coming up. So I just wanted to kind of give some announcement where announcement was due. Uh, but and I normally do this at the end of the show, but I'm just going to do it now so that we can kind of get it out of the way. But I just wanted to throw out this link. It's vocfb.com/shop. That is voiceofcollegefootball.com/shop. If you go to that link, the .com/shop, it's going to be a drop down menu of all the teams that we currently have channels on. And one of them obviously is Arkansas. So if you're looking for Arkansas merch, go to vocfb.com/shop, click the teams drop down menu. Arkansas is going to be one of the first teams because it's sorted alphabetically. And you could just click there. We got a couple of different things. We got some shirts, we got some drinks or some like cup containers, a couple different things. So check it out. It's a great way to be a part of the show and sponsor the show. So vocfb.com/shop. Now, let's get into the stuff. Business as usual. This past weekend, man, Arkansas suffered another brutal loss. And I talked about it on Saturday post game. It's not something we're new to, it's something we've experienced throughout at least my personal fandom, which has been almost 15, 20 years. It didn't feel out of the ordinary. In fact, it felt right on brand. We obviously lose that Ole Miss game 2 weeks ago as we drive down the field and fumble it in a game-winning drive situation. And we did the exact same thing against Memphis. 31-32 is ultimately the loss in that game. So we're gonna talk about it a little bit. I did do a recap show on Saturday, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But we're gonna break down what I've done in the past, and we're gonna talk about the offensive grade, the defensive grade, just some notes from each of the 2 units and how well they played. Obviously, this week and last week, it's coming after losses, so it's obviously very deflating. But we'll start on the offensive side. And currently, for this game, I've got the offensive grade as a B minus. So if you watched the show last week, post Ole Miss game, I think I gave Arkansas's offense an A minus. I predicted that this weekend we would have won against Memphis, but it would have been 31-24, and we scored 31 points. So I feel like C plus C would have been fine as well, but I'm going to give us a B minus because I thought we played fine offensively. That fourth quarter was brutal, and really the second half in general was brutal. We had, I believe it was 28 points at the half. Yeah, 28 points at the half, and to only score 3 in the second half. I mean, I think the offense got close to an A plus in the first half, and really D in the second half. So kind of it blends together for a B minus. But Taylor Green, I've got some numbers for us. Taylor Green, 18 to 34, 325 passing yards, a touchdown, and 2 picks. That second pick not at the time you want it. 12 carries, 53 yards. I think that may have been one of his rushing lows. He was one of the leading rushers in the nation for quarterbacks among in rushing yards, but only 53 this past weekend. But he still was responsible for nearly 380 yards of offense. So that was good for him. Mike Washington Jr. had 84 total yards and a touchdown. Rohan Jones, the tight end, was our leading receiver with 2 catches, 102 yards and a receiving touchdown. That 62-yard receiving touchdown, most notably. And then Omega Blake was our leading reception getter with 6 catches for 60 yards. And he's been one of our leading receivers all season. But ultimately, I wanted to give the offense a B minus. Definitely didn't play as well as we did last year. We didn't score even as much points, but we did get 31. And for me, I thought the offense still played solid. It's really the defense once again that really fell short, and that's what we'll do to transition here. I've got the defensive grade as a D minus, and if you watched Ole Miss's show, we had an F as the grade for last week. And this was I wanted to give about as close as I could, but just one notch above. So I gave it a D minus. And ultimately, the defense is really like we throw an interception, they get the ball back, they score. We get the ball, we go down, we fumble, and then at the very end of the game, it's a third and 8, I believe. They bring in their backup quarterback, and our defense could not get him on the ground. And that's one of those that like I would have given them probably a D plus prior to that, and instantly just dropped it a little bit more to a D minus. And the defense once again is the reason we're losing football games. And these past 2 weeks have been the brutal showing of that. And I hate that because if you watched the post game for Arkansas State in that following recap and preview show for the Ole Miss game, I talked about how much I kind of loved this defense. And I don't think a lot of Arkansas fans shared that same sentiment as I did. But I really thought after a 7-point defensive hold for against Arkansas State had 14, but 7 of it was on a kick return touchdown. Holding them to 7 points, who I thought Arkansas State, for a lot of people, thought they were going to be a fairly potent offense, even if they weren't necessarily that good of a team and weren't going to beat us. But to hold them to 7, I really thought that the defense had played really well. And to then go in the next week and give up 41, and they go into this past week and give up 32. It's one of those moments that I was completely wrong. I was very much wrong. And I hate that because this is a team that their offense has put a fairly good step forward, and the defense has really let them down. And I want to give them a D minus. The only guy that doesn't deserve a D minus to me is Quincy Rhodes Jr., who had 6 total tackles, 2 sacks, and 4 tackles for loss. He was single-handedly our defensive line, and to be your second leading tackler, like that's just speaks to who's on the second level of your defense. And so for him, maybe he deserves a better grade. But for the rest of the defense, D minus was to me totally fair in terms of how well they played. So offensive grade is a B minus. The defensive grade is a D minus. But now we're going to transition into this upcoming week. This is Notre Dame week. Man, I would not have guessed going into this game that Notre Dame was going to be 1-2, specifically 0-2 up until this week. And after going 0-2, I was surprised that they were ranked. Obviously, they're still ranked if they were able to win last week. But let's break down them a little bit. Obviously, Marcus Freeman's their head coach. This is a team that made the national championship game last year. They were the runner-up in college football, so a huge year for them nationally last year. If we start on the offensive side of the football, you swap out your quarterback. Last year was Riley Leonard. He was a one-year guy, one-year rental essentially from Duke. And now you've got his backup from last year, and a guy I think that the whole fan base was really high on going into the season, and I still think they're fairly high on, but that's CJ Carr. This year so far, he's thrown about 750 yards, 5 touchdowns, 2 picks, so he's averaging about 250 yards per game as a passer and almost 2 touchdowns a game. On the running game, this is where I think a lot of college football fans, even just casual fans, are very familiar with this guy. Jeremiah Love is their leading rusher. So far this season, he has 284 yards, so a little under 100 yards a game and 3 rushing touchdowns. Their backup, Jadarian Price, probably a little less known, has 187 rush yards, 5 touchdowns, actually leads their team in rushing touchdowns. A couple notable receivers. This was a team that acquired Malachi Fields from the University of Virginia. He's currently their leading receiver with 203 receiving yards, a big body player on the outside. Another big time player for them is Jaden Greathouse, the guy who was pretty instrumental for their team last year. Those two receivers are going to be big for them. Uh, their backup tight end, not necessarily the starting tight end, but their backup tight end, Ty Washington, I'm sure a lot of Arkansas fans are familiar with, a guy who was on the team for multiple years until he transferred to Notre Dame this offseason. And then the offensive line is really, to me, where they're probably the most impressive. You've got two guys specifically on the outside that I know a lot of people, like in the NFL draft community, are really high on. It's Anthony Knapp, and he's the one that plays left tackle. And then Emil Wagner, the guy who plays right tackle. And then even their center is kind of a fairly known name, Ashton Craig. So this is an offensive line. They lost a couple players from last year, but they're still going to be a very good offensive line. And the offense to me is really where going into the season, I would have said the offense was better for them anyway. But so far this season, like it's the only thing that's kept them in games, kind of like the same struggles we've had as a team. But they've played a significantly harder schedule. So right now, Notre Dame's 1-2. The week one, they played at Miami, number 10, lost by 3, 27-24. Next week, they had a bye. Following week, they play host to 16 Texas A&M. They lose in an absolute thriller of a game, 41-40. And then going into this past week, I mean, 0-2, still ranked actually going into that game, ranked 24th in the AP poll. They host Purdue, one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, and they beat them 56-30. But one thing to note is all three games they've given up at least 27 points. So that's where we're going to switch over. We're going to start talking about their defense. And this is a team most notably was fairly known from like a names perspective for their pass defense. And their pass defense has honestly been really bad. They've averaged almost 300 yards of passing offense for the opponent. And it's exceeded what they've done as an offense passing. But they have played Carson Beck, Marcel Reed, Purdue's quarterback Ryan Brown's not as notable, but they've played some fairly decent competition. Probably one of the hardest schedules so far this season to date. So you got to give them you got to think about that when you talk about our offense, who has really hadn't played anybody those first 2 weeks. We played Ole Miss, we played Memphis. Those are two bigger games. But for Notre Dame specifically, they've played two ranked teams. One of them on the road, Texas A&M team, who's probably close to top 10 if they're not right now. So they've played two really high quality opponents, but they have given a lot up in the passing game. But specifically on the defense, those secondary names, here were a couple of them: Christian Gray, Leonard Moore, Devonta Smith, a transfer in from Alabama. Those are all defensive backs, specifically corners, and then safety. Aiden Schuler was a guy I know I'd heard of going into the season. And those guys, I think they really expected them to play well so far this season. I know Leonard Moore's been out with injury, and his status even this week is up in the air. So we'll see what happens with him. But Christian Gray, Devonta Smith, and Aiden Schuler are all impressive defensive backs and guys that will probably play in the NFL. So for them to struggle as badly as they have in the past, passing defense is really abnormal, and I think really surprising to most people. But I think in the same situation that Arkansas has endured, it's really come from the defensive line and the linebacking room. The lack of pressure that they've put on their opponents. Right now, they've personally taken 6 sacks, and they've only had sacked the quarterback 3 times. And one of those was Marcel Reed, obviously a really good dual threat quarterback. But Beck, even for as good as he is, not necessarily a super mobile quarterback. And obviously Purdue and Ryan Brown, they're a severely less talented team than those first 2 teams. And for them to have such a lack of production on the defensive line and linebacking room is really kind of the reason why I think their defensive back room has suffered a little bit. Last year, I think they got just significantly more pressure from their defensive front and from their specifically in their interior. Howard Cross the third specifically was a guy in the defensive line room that was a big time player for them and really created some of that interior pressure. So for them to kind of struggle as much as they have defensively has really, to me, become from the lack of pressure that they've gotten at the defensive line and the linebacking levels. And they've really forced their defensive backs to work so much harder than they need to be doing. But that's to our benefit. So that's a little bit about Notre Dame. Offensively, you're looking at guys like Jeremiah Love, Malachi Fields, those left and right tackles, and Knapp and Wagner. And then on the defensive side, it's really that defensive back room, and we'll see how our receivers match up against them. But Christian Gray, Leonard Moore, if he's healthy, Aiden Schuler, Devonta Smith, a lot of those guys are the players to me to watch as a fan of the Razorbacks for the players to watch against us on Notre Dame. So switching over from Notre Dame, to our Arkansas Razorbacks and what to look for this week in our team, it's going to have to be another offensive battle. It's going to have to be another shootout if we have any shot to win this football game, and it's going to start with Taylor Green. And I would honestly, at this point, I talked about it multiple weeks in a row with how he's really just been the only reason we've been in these games. And he's still kind of had a couple of throws and a couple of plays where it's like, man, you wish you had those back. And I think this week would be the first week I'd really want to trade in some of those plays. Like I would take just a little bit less production for the volatility, right? The plays where late in the fourth quarter you're throwing an interception where we really just can't have that moment, or you're taking a sack on a third down to get us out of field goal range and ultimately not allow us to get points on the board. Like those are the moments where I'll take the 40-yard pass and I'll trade it for those moments being corrected. And so this week I'm intrigued to see how he does. I hope he's still as dynamic as he's been in these first four games, both in the air and with his legs. But I really want to see him mature and get better as a situational passer. And I think that's ultimately, if you're an NFL draft uh, person and you're looking at him at the next level, I think that's what you want to see as well. It's like I know he has the talent, I know he has the athleticism. I've seen him throw pretty balls, but it's the consistency and it's the situational awareness on in late games, can he go win you a football game? He sets you up great. Like we've played good first three quarters of football with him as our quarterback, but it's that fourth quarter, and I know the defense has been responsible for a lot of it, but it's that fourth quarter moments where it's like, can he take his game to the next level and play with such maturity that those situational plays he's able to come through and not take the bad sacks and not make the stupid passes that result in turnovers. So that's what I'm excited to see from him this week. I'm also hoping he can pair that with some of his weapons just playing really good football. Mike Washington Jr. specifically, I think has really taken a grasp on this running game. Russell was really good yards per carry wise this past game, but he ultimately only had 4 carries. And they've really shown, and Pittman's shown, and Petrino's shown specifically, that Mike Washington Jr., he trusts more. And that's what sucks at the end of a game when he's the guy that fumbles it, because that drive was all him until that moment. And so that's an unfortunate situation. But I think he can have a solid game this week. And then our pass catchers, to see those two tight ends, Jaden Platt and Rohan Jones. Right now, they're currently our leading receivers per reception, assuming you have at least more than a catch. But Rohan Jones is averaging a ridiculous almost 40 yards per catch. And then Jaden Platt's at about 18 yards a catch. And Rohan Jones had an awesome touchdown to start the game. But to see those two tight ends kind of start to get better and start to progress in this offense has been really, really relieving to see. And then at the receiving room, Omega Blake's really kind of separated himself from everyone else. So right now, Omega Blake has 24 catches. The rest of the receiving room, not including him, obviously, has 37. So him himself has 24, and the rest of the receiving room, just the receivers, have 37. So he's really taken that massive workload, almost 50%, probably 40% of the receptions from that wide receiver room have gone to him. He's our leading touchdown getter as a receiver, and he's the only guy that's exceeded 200 yards so far. So really counting on him, of course, this week. But I like to do each week kind of a guy that you want to focus on as a fan, somebody you want to watch, and hopefully, I think personally is going to have a breakout game, maybe more than they had in previous games. So today, the guy I have on the offensive side is wide receiver Raylan Sharp. So he was the transfer in from Fresno State. So far this season, he has 9 catches for 131 yards and 2 touchdowns. These past 2 games, he hasn't had but 2 catches and 24 yards and 2 catches and 23 yards in those 2 games, essentially against real quality opponents. But in those first 2 games, he had a combined 5 catches for 80+ yards and 2 touchdowns. So I think he can get back to it this week. I've looked a little bit into how well Notre Dame's played defensively, and specifically the players they've given up a lot of receiving yards to. And it's been those smaller, kind of shiftier guys. And watching Arkansas football this year, if you've noticed, that's kind of almost every receiver on this team. So that's where I was like, okay, if I go a little bit deeper, we've talked about Christian Gray and we talked about Leonard Moore, and those are their 2 starting corners, assuming Moore is healthy this weekend. They're going to take Omega Blake. They're going to take probably C.J. Brown, Jalen Brown, one of those 2 guys. And I think that's going to leave Raylan Sharp in that slot position as a real threat to try to make some plays and maybe have a bigger game than he's had these last 2 games. So kind of more of a niche player this week, but I've got Raylan Sharp as my offensive player to watch. And the last thing I want to touch on before we switch over to the defensive side of the football is the offensive line as well. And I feel like watching the games and talking about it as a fan of the game on this show, we haven't talked about the offensive line as much. And that's not necessarily because they've been bad. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. Like there's people the offensive line to me are the people that if you don't necessarily know their names, other than the standout players, like that to me is more of a good thing, right? Because to hear about them often, unless they're really praising them, is usually because you're hearing their names on holding penalties or false starts, and they're not necessarily good things, right? It's the defensive end beats the left tackle, and it's like, well, here he goes. This guy's given up now his second or third sack of the game, and that's not been the case. Like this offensive line to me has honestly been really solid. Stat to know too, sacks against. We've had 10 sacks as a defense, but our sacks against are 3 right now, and that speaks to a lot of Taylor Green's escapability, right? Like he doesn't take a lot of sacks. In fact, that moment late in the fourth quarter when he got Scott Starzak essentially out of his field goal range because he took a sack was literally one of the 3 sacks he's taken all year. So that testament to Green as well. But the offensive line has got to be a big part of that. And we've thrown the football a lot. I mean, we're one of the most potent passing offenses in college football. So for our offensive line to only give up 3 sacks all year, that's a spot where I think I undervalued this team going into the beginning of the year. Like I talked about Carmona shifting inside and how that wasn't going to be as helpful as him being an offensive tackle. But Corey Robinson the second's been a really good player. Caden Kittler's been just a perfect guy to have in the middle of the offense and at the center position with just such veteran leadership. And even the right side of the offensive line hasn't been too bad. And Kobe Branham, a young player, and then Amarion Harris is now finally getting like his full time role on this offensive line. But I just wanted to shout out them before we headed over to the defensive side of the football. But we can do that now, and we'll talk kind of like all 3 levels on this because it's going to take all 3 levels. But I gave the defensive line or the defense as a whole a D minus for this Memphis game, and that's just one tick better than an F that we had in that Ole Miss game. So if we could just move up to me to a C minus D plus game, I think we could have a shot to win this football game. But it's going to start with Quincy Rhodes Jr., and that's a guy who I almost hate grouping in with this defensive unit because he's had such a potent season so far. He's been one of our best players like all season, regardless, offense or defense. He just happens to play on the worst side of the football for the Arkansas defense so far this year. But I've got some numbers for him as a defender this year. 15 total tackles, 13 of them solo tackles, 7 tackles for loss, which leads the team by a healthy margin, and 5 sacks, which is 3.5 sacks more than the second leading player. He's been phenomenal. He's a guy I talked about at the beginning of this year when we were breaking down the different position groups and I was grading them. And I think I had a higher grade than a lot of people on our defensive line. And that was specifically because I thought there could be some similar production created amongst several of our defensive ends to kind of emulate what Landon Jackson did last year. But I think it's not hyperbolic to say Quincy Rhodes Jr. has been as productive as a player as Landon Jackson has been so far this season. I think he's got a real shot to be a draft prospect this year. I've heard people talk about him. And just to see how well he's played this year, it's been really a bright spot on such a horrible unit. So just to see how well he's played has been really nice. It's going to have to take some of the guys around him, specifically Cam Ballany and Jeff Rard, in the run defense to really have a big game because you're going to have to stop Jeremiah Love. And then it's going to take another rotation of pass rushers like Philip Lee, Justice Boone, Ken Talley, Charlie Collins. These guys that have played for us this year. One of them are going to have a sack, like a pivotal play in this game to really stop that Notre Dame offense. Because that's one thing we've gotten to the pass rusher, and Quincy Rhodes Jr. specifically has done a great job of that. But we haven't resulted in anything. We haven't done as well of actually finishing drives from a defensive perspective and getting to the passer. We've let guys like Trinidad Chambliss and Brendan Lewis get outside the pocket and make big plays with their legs. And we're going to have to do a better job of containing CJ Carr this weekend. The linebacking level, I was very disappointed with how he played this past week. Xavier Sorey Jr., Steven Dix Jr., to me, they both really underperformed. To me, at least to the expectations I had for them. Bradley Shaw had a decent game. We talked about that on Saturday, but I think it was really just because he came in relief, and I didn't expect him to play as much as maybe he ultimately did. And maybe we'll see more from him going forward. But I was not impressed with this linebacking unit this past weekend. And this was a unit I think a lot of people would have recognized as the best unit on our defense. And to see them play as poorly as they did was really frustrating. And I hope that this weekend in this Notre Dame game, like linebackers to me are very important at the NFL level, of course, but there's a reason they get drafted in the later rounds in the NFL draft, and that's because they're not considered as valuable as a position, and there's some guys that can really interchange there. at the professional level. But to me, for college football, the linebacking room is really important, and or at least more important than it is at the professional level. And to have Xavier Sori going into the year, a guy who was third team All SEC last year, I really thought that we were going to be fairly set there. Like whoever was going to play alongside him, maybe that be Bradley Shaw, maybe that be Steven Dix Jr., maybe that even be maybe the true freshman Tavion Wallace, that we were going to really be okay there. And to have such a poor performance last week and do a fairly poor job in coverage and in tackling, I hope that they can step up going into this Notre Dame game. And then lastly, from the defensive back room, and this is where both teams for the most part are going to have to make their money on this. We'll see what we can get from some of these outside corners. Obviously, Kenai Walker, because of his injury, didn't play this past week. But Julian Neal to me was a guy who looked pretty good. That call on Cortez Braham against Julian Neal, I think most people can agree was the wrong call. Broadcast talked about it. It really could have made a difference in if we won that game or not. But I thought he's played fairly good. He had that interception later in that game, which was a heck of an interception, really bailed out Taylor Green on the other side of the football. So I'm very proud of how Julian Neal's played, but it's a really mixed bag amongst the other guys. Jaheim Singletary, to me, hasn't had a great season so far. Shakur Smalls has been pretty solid. Jordan Young, I haven't loved what he's done this game, this past game in this year so far. Larry Worth a third, he's kind of been hit or miss to me. Miguel Mitchell, he's been all right, but it's just truly Quincy Rhodes to me has gotten after the passer and really put pressure on the quarterback. And so some of the other defensive players have done a good job of that as well. But rather that resulting in poor passes on the offensive side of the football from those opposing quarterbacks, it's really resulted in long runs. And I'm hoping that we can somehow, I don't know what that's going to look like from Travis Williams and the defensive scheme, but I'd love to see those pass rush plays where we ultimately get home or get close to getting home result in either deflections or strip sacks, or at the very least, a quarterback that makes a poor decision because he's got to make a quick decision and gives a spot for our defensive backs to make a play on the football. And I haven't feel like I've seen a lot of that, even like the interception that Julian Neal had last week against Memphis. Like that was just an awesome play by him. That had nothing really to do to me with the defensive back room. Like Brendan Lewis, in fact, had all the time in the world and took a shot late and ultimately missed on it. But I'm interested to see how the defensive back room does this weekend. This defense has been very poor, to say the least, these past two games. So to get anything, and specifically turnovers, I think is the thing we're going to have, because to get extra possessions on the offensive side of the football and to limit Notre Dame at the same time is really what we're going to have, because this defense has shown to have the ability to break and give up big runs, give up big passes. And we know that there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game. Like we're not winning this game if it's 20-17. Like that's just not going to happen. Like we're probably going to give up 30 plus points. So we're going to need one or two crucial stops or one or two crucial turnovers for this team to have a chance of winning this football game this weekend. So we talked about the offensive player to watch. It was Raylan Sharp. I went through the defense. I'll give you the defensive player to watch, and it's really no surprise. It's essentially the Taylor Green of the defensive side of the football, and that's defensive end Quincy Rhodes Jr. It's going to really take a big game from him. He had a big game this weekend, and we weren't able to win. But I think that if he has another big game, and some of those ancillary players around him can get after the quarterback and put pressure on him, or some of these defensive backs can play that extra second or two on the back end and make plays and get PBUs and really have an influence on this game. But I think it all starts and ends with defensive end Quincy Rhodes Jr. So I've given you the offensive breakdown. I've given you the defensive breakdown. We've talked about Notre Dame and what they're going to look like going into this weekend. But ultimately, it's time for score prediction time. What do I think is going to be the outcome of this football game? I picked us to beat Alabama A&M, of course. I picked us to beat Arkansas State. Going into the Ole Miss game prior to the season, I had actually picked us to lose that game, and I swapped my pick, and I decided, you know what, I think I've seen enough from this defense to believe that we can win that game, and we lost. Going into the Memphis game, I said 31-24, we're going to win this football game, and we lost. So right now, I've picked us 4 times. We're 2-2. I'm personally 2-2 in that matter. And for the first time all season in a pregame show, I've decided to pick against the Arkansas Razorbacks. So my score prediction this weekend, I do have it to be a close one. Right now, the spread, according to most books, is around 5.5. I think we can cover that. It's going to be tight, to be honest with you. As an Arkansas fan, I'm quite surprised that it's 5.5. I think that speaks more to maybe how Notre Dame's played defensively this season. But I think we do lose this weekend. I think we lose 34-38. I think we're going to give up a lot of points. We gave up 41 to Ole Miss. We gave up 32 to Memphis. I think Notre Dame's going to score right alongside that. I do think they'll give up a lot of points. We've scored a lot of points this year. I don't think we've had a game less than 31. Actually, 31 last week was our lowest scoring game. I do think we scored just a little bit more than that, and we scored 34. But I think we do ultimately fall short. And I think the last thing I really want to mention as a Razorback fan that's going to be in attendance for this game, I just don't want to see what happened these last 2 weeks. I don't want to see a game-winning drive possibility result in a turnover. I don't want to see the defense quit at the end of the game when you have a realistic shot to still win that football game. Like I've beat a dead horse talking about this between today and between Saturday's post-game show. That 3rd and 8, if you just stop him there, you're going to get the ball around the 40-yard line post-punt with about 45 to 50 seconds left in that game. No, there's no timeouts, but it's college football. The clock stops when you get a first down. You have a real shot to get Scott Starzik in his field goal range and win that game 34-32, but your defense late in that game, they quit. They genuinely quit on that last play. And I hate to see that because that's coaching and that's a lack of effort and that's a lack of hustle and that's a lack of heart. And that's something that we just can't have if we have any shot to even compete in this football game. The caliber opponent that we're playing this weekend, just from a perspective of like college football culture and college football programs, is the best team we played this year. Maybe one of the best teams we play all year. Notre Dame is at 22 because they've lost 2 games to ranked teams early on in the season. But this is a team that, of the 5 opponents we've played, including Notre Dame this weekend, going into the preseason, people would have said far and away that this was the best team we would have played up into this moment. And I still fairly agree with him. Like, it helps that it's at home. Like, these last 2 games have been on the road, but you've had a real shot to win those games. And I think that, if I'm being totally honest, I think we have a real shot to win this game. I mean, for the spread to be 5.5, I mean, there is a realistic shot that we can win. Do I ultimately think we do? No. But I'd love to see us compete so hard and play our best brand of football and have the defense step up when needed. I'm not expecting the defense to play for a perfect game. I'm not expecting the defense to hold them under 20 points. Not at all. They have a good offense and we have a bad defense. But it's make those plays, it's fight, and just you can just see the difference in that. You can see the difference in that. That first game or that first loss against Ole Miss, it was heartbreaking. It was truly heartbreaking. And as a fan, it was just like, man, I feel like we've been there before. But this Memphis game, man, there was some of that. But at the end of the game, I was just disappointed with the lack of effort. Like, that was honestly the most frustrating thing to me. It wasn't the fact that we fumbled 2 weeks in a row on a potential game-winning drive. It was the fact that on 3rd and 8, you don't get that stop, and you had a clear path to getting that stop. You literally had him right there, and you just quit on tackling. That's the part that you just can't stand as a fan. So that's the part I want to see cleaned up. If that results in a win this week, I'm going to be very, very happy with that. But that's not what I'm expecting as of right now. I'm expecting a loss, but I want to see us fight, and I want to see this defense take real accountability and have a real passion against this Notre Dame offense and just understand, like, we've been bad. This has not been a great last 2 weeks. But we have an opportunity in our building, right? In our building against Notre Dame in front of our home fans to really show up and show out. And I'm excited to see how we do. So my prediction, like I said, 34-38 loss, but I'm really excited to see us play this weekend and just to see, like, this is a pivotal moment. I'm not saying we have to win it for us to, like, I'm not saying I think the season's kind of already fallen off the rails a little bit. I'm not saying it's going to fall off further if we lose in a close one to Notre Dame, but you can really put the season back on the rails if you win this weekend against the 22nd team ranked in the country and Marcus Freeman. And there's going to be a lot of fans there. It's going to be a really exciting game. And I just hope that from first quarter to fourth quarter that it remains that way and that we have a real shot to win this football game. So that's my prediction. Please like, share, subscribe, tune in to Arkansas at the Voice of College Football. I've mentioned this so many times, but we have shows each week We've got our Monday show, this current one. It's going to be usually around 5:30. Sometimes it's a little bit earlier. Our next show is going to be following the Notre Dame game. These past 3 weeks, we've had a post-game show. These last two post-game shows have been brutal, but it's an 11 a.m. kick, so it's probably going to be around 3 or 4 o'clock. I'm going to be at this game, so it could be a little bit later. These last games I've just watched from my house, but further details are going to be posted on YouTube. Just keep in touch closer to game time. On that note, though, we'll see you Saturday for a post-game reaction, and maybe, just maybe, possibly, probably not, but maybe, you never know, we'll have a win against Notre Dame this weekend. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Ultimately, God bless.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.